Good evening. On this terrible night of Halloween, I'm gonna tell you 7 spooky stories from the Russian classical literature. I'm not gonna do the effect the entire time, am I? Russians don't normally celebrate Halloween. It's a custom that was brought over somewhere in the 90s and it never truly stuck. I was buying these pumpkins the other day at the premium grocery store, and the clerk who was helping me out, she asked me, "When is this Halloween anyways?" So that's about the only thing that you need to know about Russians and Halloween. Some articles now imply that there was something that Slavic pagans celebrated called Velis's Night, and they even go as far as to say that it was also celebrated on the 31st of October. But the thing to remember about Slavic mythology is that we know very little about it. Velis, for example, who was one of those deities from the never fully formed Slavic pantheon of gods, we know nothing about him really. So if there was a holiday that the Slavic pagans celebrated that resembled Halloween, I'm gonna assume that we know nothing about it. I am, however, gonna use the opportunity of Halloween to tell you 7+ spooky stories from the Russian literature, so let's get to it. Bezhin is part of the Sportman Sketches, a series of short stories by Ivan Turgenev, published 1852. In this particular story, their narrator gets lost as the night falls when he's returning home from the hunt. He finds himself on a Bezhin, this mystical place. There he runs into 5 young boys who are guarding the horses by the fire. In the night, the boys tell each other spooky stories about the domovoi who was misbehaving at the factory, about a peasant man named Gavrila who escaped the clutches of a mermaid, and about a woman who was driven mad by a vodinoi. One of the boys then goes to fetch some water, and he hears a voice of a drowned boy, a clear omen of his own soon demise. While the stories that the boys tell each other would never be considered scary or even truly spooky by today's standards, I think it's a good Halloween story. It has that feel to it. The imagery is all there, a clearing in the middle of nowhere in the night, and the boys telling each other spooky stories over the campfire. It also provides a quick glimpse into the Slavic folklore, the dangerous, seductive mermaids, the mischievous domovoi, and the ominous vodinoi. I'm gonna bundle a few stories into one bullet point here. Orest Somov, just like Gogol, was of Ukrainian origin, and just like Gogol was also drawn to the folklore of that particular part of the Russian Empire. In a sense, Orest Somov walked so Gogol could run. Somov has written a number of short stories in a period of 1827 through 1833. The ones that I wanted to talk to you about are Kikimora, the Mermaid, the Werewolf, and the Witches of Kiev. All these tales read more like folk tales or even fairy tales. Each one highlights a specific mythological creature and brings up the lore associated with it. For example, the story about a mermaid shows that the mermaid is a drowned maiden, that they run around in the woods sometimes because they have legs in this part of the woods, and they seek vengeance on those who've wronged them. A fun detail about Russian/Ukrainian mermaids is that they tickle their victim to death. It is very much highlighted in another story, Kopalo's Eve. These tales, just like fairy tales, have an associated moral with them, but a weird one. In The Witches of Kiev, for example, the husband finds out that his wife is a witch, and he even follows her to the Sabbath and is punished gravely for it. So is the moral then not to get into your wife's business? In the story Kikimora is a spirit who inhabits the house, and she's even helping out with the womanly chores, but she's a supernatural creature needs to be get rid of, and when they attempt to do that, she gets nasty in turn and starts to misbehave. So should have let her just be then? The werewolf is the cutest one of all of them. The supernatural is just played for laughs, so it's not even spooky by any standards. I would recommend these stories not for their spookiness, which they have very little of, but if you're interested in the Slavic folklore creatures, and fairy tales for grown-ups. Ghost was written by Ivan Turgenev, 1863. In it, the narrator is visited by a ghostly creature of a beautiful young woman who demands that he give himself over to her. When he does, she picks him up and they fly over the countryside. Over the course of the next few nights, she takes him to different places around the world, like Italy, Germany, parts of Russia, but he gets progressively weaker in the process. Until one night they meet the embodiment of death. This story received a somewhat lukewarm reception by the critics, and for me it's a little bit weaker than other Turgenev stories. It still has the Turgenev's beautiful writing, the depictions of the outside and from the state of the characters in, but something is missing. The supernatural being, a girl named Alice, is not explicitly stated what she is, although the early editions did call her a vampire. And it really should work with the theme. It's about death and the protagonist's understanding and acceptance of it, while Alice is literally sucking the life out of him. If you're interested in obscure philosophical ponderings of the main character while he's being carried around by a supernatural being, this book might be for you. A Terrible Divination is a short story written by Alexander Bestuzhev-Marlinsky, 1831. A narrator travels to a ball where he plans to meet a woman that he's in love with, but she's married to a different man. As the night falls, he and his guide get lost until they stumble upon a peasant house where the young folk are performing various divinations. Another stranger appears from the night and sets off to show our narrator that all men are corruptible, and through conversations and gifts manages to bring out the vices out of the young women and men. One of the young men then offers to show our narrator the most dreadful of divinations. They go to the cemetery, set off the necessary equipment, and yet nothing happens. But then the stranger from before appears and offers to take our narrator to the ball. The events evolve and devolve from there, but I don't necessarily want to spoil the whole thing. There is one point that I want to make, so I'm gonna go into spoilers, but if you don't want spoilers, there is a time code for you to skip to. So the narrator makes it to the ball, he finds his woman, they proclaim their love for each other, but then the stranger from before appears and tells them that the husband found out and he's furious. They flee from the ball, but the husband is chasing them on horseback. He manages to catch up to them, the altercation occurs, and the narrator deals 3 deadly blows to the husband's head. The stranger from before appears, he pushes the husband into the frozen river and takes the narrator and his woman to the cemetery from before. There he says that he received everything that he wanted from the deal and pushes the narrator and the woman into the open grave, and then the narrator feels the soil and the ground closing in on him, and then he wakes up. All of this, it all didn't happen the night kind of when they were trying to perform the terrible divination. He fell asleep, and he says that in an offer not to tempt fate, he never saw his beloved Polina again. Now, the spoiler thing that I wanted to bring up, that when it was revealed that it was all a dream, I kind of said out loud, "Oh no!" Most likely because we've seen this done before and it's kind of stale. But the fun thing is that the narrator/author instantly called me out. He said, like, well, the reader might be disappointed by this turn of events, but would you have liked for me to turn into a murderer? What kind of person would want that? And I hear that and I feel that, and I don't necessarily think that the reader wants that particular conclusion simply because they're terrible people, but because it's a more exciting outcome. But I absolutely love the instant reaction from me and from the narrator as well. And the story has a twist ending and a little bit of gore, but it also has the spookiness elements and the fairy tale elements in it. Our protagonist crosses the divide between the natural and the supernatural when he steps off the path and finds the lost cabin. That's the trope that comes straight out of fairy tales. The stranger that plays a crucial role is the trickster type of evil who brings out the true awful qualities in people without instigating the events themselves. The time setting of a New Year's Eve is also significant. That's one of the few times when Slavic people perform their divinations, as the divide between our world and the next is believed to be the thinnest, closest to the winter solstice. The most known divinations are mentioned or described in this one. The most obvious one is women trying to find out who their groom is going to be. There is a little bit of moralism in this story, but it can be expected from the 19th century story, and it is delivered in an interesting way, so I can genuinely recommend this story for you. In the Mirror is a short story by Valery Brusov, written in 1903. The narrator, a woman this time, tells us that she's always liked mirrors and that no mirror is the same, that they all show a different reality, and the reflection that we see is actually our double, and each mirror shows a different one. The mirror that was fatal to her was a pier glass that she purchased. She used to stare into it for hours until her reflection double managed to overpower her and switch places with her. The narrator then became trapped behind the glass in this void of a dimension, and her reflection took her place in the real world. It is a very short story, maybe 13 pages, but it's a decent nugget of a story. Obviously, this theme of reflections has been explored since, in starting with stories like Alice Through the Looking Glass or even Coraline. But for 1903, it's pretty good. I enjoyed the perspective and the potential of the supernatural elements. If scaled up, it could turn into a decent horror story. The unfortunate part is that the full title of the story is In the Mirror, Notes from the Psychiatrist's Archives, so we know that our narrator is a quote-unquote crazy person from the very start. I would have probably saved it for an end reveal, but regardless, it's a short, decent story and just that tiny bit of creepy. The Vampire was written by Alexei Tolstoy, 1841. The protagonist, called Runevsky, at a ball meets a man called Rybarenko, who's rather concerned by the fact that there are so many vampires out in the open at this ball. He specifically points out two members of the party, an old woman and her companion, and he's rather concerned for the old woman's granddaughter, as she's likely gonna fall victim to those vampires. Over the course of the story, we learn various details about 3 generations of that old woman's family that coincidentally comes from Hungary, and the story often goes into story within the story, characters telling each other the necessary background. And in the end, it's up to the reader to decide whether vampires were real or not. There are 3 points of view presented: the logical, the supernatural, and there's something in between. I think it's a good decision to leave this ambiguity in the end, to allow the reader to interact with the text and to come to their own conclusions, as the evidence presented can be interpreted either way. Stylistically, beyond this Russian nesting doll approach of a story within the story, it also carries a lot of our beloved Gothic fiction in it. The implied presence of the supernatural in the form of vampires, but also this reclusive estate house with rooms that have not been used in years. The protagonist's love interest is a full-on damsel in distress, and there is also a little bit of that vengeful persecution in there. One of the narrators, Rybarenko, is called crazy from the start, so it adds this unreliable narrator element into it, so you can start questioning him even before the events described become reminiscent of a fever dream. I'd call it a decent example of Gothic fiction, so if you're interested in that, this might be for you. The Family of Vourdalak, The Family of the Vampire, was originally written in French, La Famille de Vourdalak, by Alexei Tolstoy, 1839, but was only published after his death, 1884. The narrator, Marquis d'Urfé, tells a story at a party. As a young man, he once traveled through Serbia and was forced to stay in a peasant man's house for a night. The family elder, Gorcha, has been gone in the mountains for 10 days. He left with an order to his older son that if he were to return more than 10 days later, to kill him with a wooden spear, as he's likely turned into a vampire. Gorcha returns on the 10th day, and the family welcomes him back home. The older son is suspicious though, and is proven to be correct. Over the next few days, Gorcha starts to terrorize the household. Again, I wanted to mention one thing about the story that goes into spoiler territory, so if you don't want spoilers, the time code is here for you. Our Marquis wakes up most nights with Gorcha looking at him through the window, but the true victim is the oldest grandchild of Gorcha. He manages to kill the child. Gorcha's son Georgi then stabs Gorcha with a wooden spear, killing the vampire. While all of this horror is happening, our Marquis is quite taken by Gorcha's daughter Zdenka. So while there is this vampire running around, he barges in on Zdenka and tries to seduce her, but is only interrupted by Georgi, the Gorcha's son, and is kicked out of the household. Sometime later, he travels back through these same paths and is warned not to go to that village as it's completely been wiped out by vampires. Marquis, in an act of full-on stupidity that he calls bravery, decides to spend the night in the house, as the fate of Zdenka, that girl that he lusted over, was left ambiguous. In the night, Zdenka comes to him, but he soon realizes that she's a vampire and all of her family is watching them from the outside, so he manages to trick them and escapes with his life. And before I get into the non-spoiler commentary, I just want to say that in the middle of this rather chilling tale, there's a weirdly comedic moment. As the vampires are chasing our Marquis out of the village, he's riding on horseback and they're running after him, and then they randomly start throwing children after him. Children that are also vampires, and one of the children even manages to bite the horse that the Marquis is riding. But it almost turned into slapstick comedy for a moment there for me. It reminded me a little bit of that last Twilight movie, when there's this horrid battle going on and they also start throwing each other around. I've actually never seen Twilight. I've only seen commentary videos on them. But if you watch enough of those, you get a slightly distorted but more comedic version of those movies, so I think I came out on top. Out of all of these stories, this is probably the scariest one, at least it is for me personally. What constitutes as scary can be a very subjective thing, but for me, it's that suspense element, the moment before something happens, is the most scary. There is that imagery there that my subconscious so helpfully elaborated on, of a vampire, Gorcha, looking in through the window at our protagonist. And that's scary for me. The darkness, the glowing eyes, the implied threat, it's all very kind of haunting. Even as events escalate later on, it's still the most scary thing for me than watching him from the outside. As far as vampire lore goes, the thing to remember that Dracula will have come out only like 50 years later. A source of inspiration for Alexei Tolstoy was The Vampire, written by William Polidori, 1819, a work that is considered to be canonical as far as the vampire lore goes, along with Bram Stoker's Dracula. And while Polidori's work inspired so many authors, they were still very much experimenting with the lore and the genre. For example, here Tolstoy draws a distinction between a vourdalak and a vampire. Vourdalak only comes for his family members, while a vampire is not that picky. Vourdalak as a word most likely comes from Alexander Pushkin, who used it in a poem of the same name, and it looks like a distortion of a Slavic word for werewolf. But in reality, in Russian we've now adapted a more universal vampire, and the classic Russian upyr and vourdalak are used interchangeably and rather rarely. So that lore of vourdalaks only common for family members looks like it was added by Alexei Tolstoy. The story is also considered to be Gothic fiction, the air of mystery, the very real presence of the supernatural, the damsel in distress, and the morally grey protagonist. And boy is he morally grey. While he genuinely tries to help save this family from the vampire, he is also very much interested in this young girl Zdenka. There is a literal vampire on the loose, who's her father by the way, and he still barges in the night into her room trying to seduce her. He's only stopped by the brother barging in. I don't think that the vampire looking in from the window deterred him much. He's so horny, it's hilarious. So if you like scary stories, you can add this one to your roster. Gogol in general is your guy if you want something fantastical in your book diet. From the spooky stories I should mention A May Night or The Drowned Maiden and A Terrible Vengeance from the series of short stories Evenings on a Farm near Tikainka. Evenings in general have that mystical / fairy tale feel to them, but these two are the more somber and dark out of all of them. In The May Night we're once again treated to the mermaid lore, even though they're not necessarily called that here. Here a girl, she drowned herself because her stepmother was mistreating her and she's now seeking vengeance on her, and every passerby can become a collateral damage. In A Terrible Vengeance, a woman's father randomly appears whom she's never seen before, and then he starts coming to her in her dreams demanding that she marry him. He turns out to be a sorcerer and nothing will stand in his way of getting this woman, but the sorcerer is also cursed. But I think it's somewhat universally agreed that V is the horror story in Russian literature. It was written in 1835 by Nikolai Gogol as part of Mirgorod series. A protagonist, Homa Brud, stumbles upon a witch's house, and in the night she comes to him, she climbs on his back and flies over the countryside. He manages to overpower her, but a few nights later gets summoned by a Cossack chief whose daughter demanded that Homa reads prayers at her coffin. He understands that it's that witch that he killed, and on the first night when he reads prayers at an abandoned church, the dead witch rises from her coffin. The story is a perfect example of Gothic fiction. The abandoned church, the witches, the ghouls, the vampires, the air of mystery, the veiled sexual undertones. The world that story is set in is also fascinating. It reads as magical realism. The supernatural coexists with the ordinary or even divine, and nobody bats an eye. I have a full episode on V, go check it out, I think it turned out really good. And if you want a Russian horror story, V should be your number one. It's not much in terms of Russian horror stories, but the reality is generally more scary than the fiction, so anyways, happy Halloween!